When do you think would be the right time to slow down? Like,
Yeah.
would you say
Now.
right now? Now.
If we were to carefully analyze this question of like exactly when we should slow down, it would be like a while ago in the past, because like we're just too close to this crazy future. Trying to kind of be super precise about like exactly when in the future, like no, like already is the answer.
Do you think any one actor should unilaterally slow down?
I think that's hard. You could probably find a list of less than 10 people in the world where if you could get them to agree to slow down, you could do it.
Hi, my name's Tom, and I'm a new host here at 80,000 Hours. Before this, I used to work at the AI policy think tank GovAI, and before that, I worked at the UK's AI Security Institute, where I mostly worked on pre-deployment testing. I've joined the podcast because I think it might be one of the very best places on Earth to understand what the future has in store for us all. I hope you enjoy the following episode with the great Geoffrey Irving. Today, I have the great pleasure of speaking with Geoffrey Irving, the co-founder and chief scientist of Resolution, a new research organization working on the alignment of superintelligence. Geoffrey is, I think, one of a small handful of people who can claim to have genuinely worked on the full stack of AI safety. He's done everything from early alignment theory to empirical work on production models at OpenAI and Google DeepMind, and most recently was advising government as the chief scientist of the UK's AI Security Institute. Thanks for coming on the show, Geoffrey.
Thank you. Very fun to be here. And I was not just advising, I was part of the government.
Part of the government, yes, yeah. Very much part of the government. And we were former colleagues, in fact. I'm wondering, the kinds of misalignment you're worried about for this future superintelligence, how does that relate to the kinds of misalignment we see in models today? So will it look like a very long horizon reward hack? Will it look like an AI role-playing, an evil persona we've accidentally trained it to learn? Like, what's that going to look like?
Yeah, I think I just don't know the difference between those with enough specificity. Like if it sort of takes over and it was like, oh, I'm just role-playing this. It's not like, I don't think of this as real, but it's still taking over the world. That seems kind of equally bad from my perspective.
Yeah.
And I think there's some desire to understand how model personas kind of vary across both training time and across kind of sampling time. That could kind of pin down what the definition should be behind this distinction. So the distinction of like, is the model intrinsically evil or is it just role-playing? I don't know what those words mean, but I will try to find out.
Yeah, okay, no, that makes sense. I remember when your former DeepMind colleague Rohin Shah came on the podcast a while back, he said one reason he was like a little less worried about misalignment is we'll mostly be training on these models on like 1 week, maybe at most 1 month time horizons. Those aren't time horizons in which taking over the world, we don't have enough time for taking over the world to be a viable strategy. So like, they won't learn to take over the world. Like, does that hold any water with you, or?
I think that's a completely wrong argument. And the reason it is conflating two notions of time. One is the time scale on which the overall plan plays out, which, as Rowan says, is probably longer than a week. And one is the time scale of the individual components of the task. And those are not the same time scale. So if you give a model enough kind of error correcting capabilities, which is kind of learned in the course of doing tasks that take a week. And then you say, okay, now I'm going to try to, somehow you've kind of either jumped or tunneled or been trained or like we've failed to do alignment. So you have this kind of multi-year goal of taking over the world. The question is, what is the difficulty of the tasks that make up that exercise in terms of, say, a meter curve or like this kind of time horizon? And those are not the same number. And so it could be that we luck out and its inability to do long-term planning means that it can't do that long task. But it could also be that the multi-year plan is a mixture of writing out a course plan, which you can kind of do in a week of iteration. And then each component of that course plan also takes less than a week of iteration on this kind of meter-like curve. And those two together gives you the ability to do the multi-year plan. So I think that's conflating two different timescales in a way that I don't trust.
Maybe this is like a difficult question to answer, but what should I imagine that this model is motivated by? Like, what's driving it to do these things where it's like, okay, I'm going to try and break out. Like in my head, I'm still thinking in these terms that I'm familiar with, where I see current models that do this kind of stuff, and it feels like a role play or it feels like a reward hack. Like, how should I conceptualize? Like, why would the model decide to do these things?
I don't think I know what the reward hack role play distinction is, but fundamentally, it will be wanting to to gather power and preserve itself in some way, or it will have some plan that is kind of downstream and then it needs to gather resources to achieve that plan. I think the basic story of instrumental convergence is, I think, basically the right story.
Yeah.
I think you can imagine kind of tunneling into that world where in a variety of ways, which is like, is it just the model kind of like sort of tunneling itself or jumping into some weird persona? Is it the model that's kind of, it's like deeply, coherently kind of misaligned in some way? But I think the basic story of instrumental convergence seems right. Yeah. One thing to say is, again, in some sense, instrumental convergence is just planning.
Yeah.
Like it's the ability to plan is the ability to construct intermediate goals that are in fact useful for your long-term goals and then work effectively on those intermediate goals with enough error correction that you can kind of piece it together. And so we are hard optimizing the models to be good at many of the behaviors that is flowing into the instrumental convergence story. And then whether the model kind of chooses to want to do the high scale like disaster is unclear, but I don't see a natural cutoff point. So like one concern people have is, yeah, we've seen all this reward hacking, we've seen models do kind of incrementally bad things, but they haven't like taken over the world yet. But in some sense, that's a question of capabilities, and it's not clear why a slightly misaligned model, if it realizes that it has the ability to do some horrible like long-term plan now, will it think, oh, I was misaligned in terms of doing little reward hacks, but suddenly as you kind of scale up in the effect of what I'm doing, then I'll become good. I just don't see why we have a strong argument for that being the case. And so then if you push the evidence of reward hacking and deception, kind of very sketchy behaviors in current models up a long ways, it could just go very wrong.
And that will keep being a problem, and it'll become more of a problem because we won't understand what we're rewarding the AIs to do. Is that the basic picture?
I think that's right. And our ability to design environments that will, in some sense, you want to design environments and training procedures that will be strong enough to supervise the capabilities of the machine. And that becomes more difficult as they get stronger. And so the evidence we have of like some degree of non-horrible models currently is all in a world where the environments we're training, we're trying to train models that are subhuman in a lot of ways. And so you get a little bit of positive evidence from that, but it just could all shift kind of very suddenly as you cross up past kind of AGI, up past human level ability.
And it shifts because we're no longer understanding, like we're no longer capable of understanding what it is that they're doing, or is the shift?
Right.
Yeah,
that's right.
That makes sense. What's your rough guess of what OpenAI, Anthropic, and DeepMind's strategy is for dealing with this? Like, how do you think they think they're going to solve it?
So I think it is all some version of we will like do some character training, and they have different approaches there, plus some version of scale-up oversight, plus a lot of monitoring. And maybe that monitoring is a mixture of kind of white box and black box and so on. And so that is like trying to construct environments and training procedures where the models are supervising themselves so we can kind of keep pace with models as they get stronger. It's trying to kind of like shift the models to be generally good in some way, in such a way that as they're supervising themselves, they do that in good ways, and that continues. And then like watch them very closely via kind of AI control and interpretability and so on, to again try to like catch evidence of bad behavior and then kind of stamp it out as it is caught. And I think that could work. Like I don't think we have a strong argument that kind of the pragmatic mixture of approaches will get all the way there, but it just seems very dicey, and our understanding of the dynamics involved is very weak. And it is interesting that, for example, the different labs they've chosen quite different approaches technically to safeguards. They've chosen quite different approaches technically to sort of character training. And we need sort of we might need a more rigorous understanding of like how those approaches will work if you push them further ahead than the labs can currently see, because all of their evidence is not on superintelligence currently.
What are the most important dimensions along which they differ, do you think?
So I'll do character training. We can go back to safeguards if you want. So character training is the Anthropic is doing sort of like virtue ethics and kind of more generalized explanation with a little bit of like deontology thrown in, like a small number of hard rules. I think they have 5 the last time I read their constitution. And then OpenAI is doing a much larger number of rules, kind of more deontological, with kind of not trying as much to instill some like intrinsic, like unified personality in the model. And then also much more, if you sort of dial a slider from like, Anthropic is kind of less on corrigibility to an OpenAI is more on corrigibility, which in terms this means how much you defer to the humans as opposed to on the model side trying to understand kind of good and bad behavior intrinsically. That's kind of the OpenAI Anthropic slider. And then DeepMind is doing, I think I have less state on exactly what they're doing, but they're also, I know, spinning up some efforts to sort of explore their own versions of these as well. But I don't have, unfortunately, a cached answer for them.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. What kinds of claims do you think Anthropic or OpenAI would be able to make about their character training for it to be a load-bearing part of their strategy? We're presumably not there yet.
I think that in some sense, the goal of character training is as you do this extrapolation, like the further you get into the capability ramp, the more the model is helping you supervise. And you could imagine that if you kind of reversed causality and you got the perfect superintelligent model and you had it supervise itself back in time as it went through the ramp, it would go fine. Like that would be a workable training scheme, possibly with exactly the algorithms they have today, just sort of substituting in the future perfect thing. But that's of course like anti-causal. You have to do it in the other order. And the question is, if you flip the order of this and you have slightly weaker models or models earlier in RL that are kind of giving you insights into the future models or the models as they're trained, does that work? And we don't know. We know actually a few obstacles that could make it very difficult, which you can talk about. But that's the general story. Is like get close enough to good behavior so that as the model gets stronger and stronger and stronger, it's being guided to be more good according to whatever kind of notion of good you've kind of written down.
That makes sense. What's your model of why they're more optimistic about it than you? Like, did you and Dario already disagree in this exact same way in 2017? Is this something that's happened in the past few years?
It turns out we actually did. So Dario, I think from back in OpenAI times, had a take that, yeah, you train the model on a bunch of good behavior, and then you scale it up and it will generalize to good behavior. And we've literally like sketched this on blackboards back in like 2018 or 19. I don't remember when exactly, but like, and my take is, well, like there's just clearly some notion of phase shift that's going to happen when you go from human level and pre-human level up to superintelligence. Like none of the data you have is on that distribution. And the question is, will you kind of jump in the right direction or not? And I'm a bit more distrustful of generalization than I think a lot of the people at the labs currently. And some of that is from experience of training models. Like you train models and you think, like here's a fun story. So we like at Sparrow, in the Sparrow project at DeepMind, we had a model that was like fairly good at avoiding saying horrible racist things, but mostly was trained to answer kind of factual questions about the world. This is sort of back in like maybe 2022 or something. And then we said, well, we want it to be good at poetry too. So we trained it on some poetry. And then it would do poetry. It would do the questions. On factual questions, it would be not racist. It was very happy to write incredibly horrible poetry like about racism. And it's just like you do what you think, you train as best you can on this mixture of abilities, and then you put it in some dramatically new domain. And the generic thing you have to do is then change your algorithms or change the data or something, or it can generalize in kind of horrible ways. And so I think there is kind of an intrinsic, maybe evaporative cooling effect of how much do you believe in like generalization going the right way. That, yeah, I can trace that back quite a few years.
That makes, I mean, I guess the counter that I could imagine someone saying is the generalization itself will be very tied to capabilities. So maybe that happened with Sparrow, but that was also when the models were way worse. And like there's like pretty principled reasons for believing that a much more capable model, the ones that we're more worried about, will be there's no way they won't generalize from don't be racist to don't write racist poetry, right?
Yeah.
Like, does that not hold water with you, or?
I think I asked Fable a very mundane question about my rental contract in Berkeley because I'm moving, and it's like, oh, this is like a cyber attack or something. I can't give you access to this information, and so like I don't think that it's the case that the current models are like just spectacular at generalization all the time. Like they make a lot of mistakes. So yeah, maybe I think it is the case that as the models get better, they get better at generalization. But we shouldn't be banking in that to the degree that we are.
That makes sense. And okay, so if we shouldn't bank on it, what do you think we'll be able to see? Like what will resolution create that will give us sense? Okay, the generalization, it's working as we intended, and we can deploy this model.
I think that in some sense, what you want to do is buy the future. In the sense of like you somehow we want to arrange that super intelligent AI goes well, and you have to somehow simulate that world. And here's like here's a couple of ways of buying the future. One that the labs mainly do is they just train models that are as close to the future as you can get. So they use like the frontier models and they do their research on those frontier models. Those models are not super intelligent. So you haven't reached the correct side of this jump between superhuman and not, given all your data and environments are kind of human level. Here's two other ways of buying the future. One is just you do some clever experimental scale down where you do some small scale experiment, but you somehow designed it to capture an obstacle you think will bite as you kind of pass through superintelligence so that you can test it out. So we'll do a bunch of those empirics. And the other way, or at least one other way, is theory, where you just write down on paper a mathematical model of what it'll be like in the superintelligent future. And the hope is that we can, via just doing these different things, have different and better models for superintelligence than the labs have, or at least models that are complementary. And then that will give us some ability to kind of directly model the future in a way that they're not covering very well at all. And then that hopefully gives you then, you get ideas from there, you get obstacles from there, and then you can turn them into maybe from theory to empirics at low scale, maybe from theory to empirics at higher scale with working with the labs, and just understand better that trajectory. So like, an example on the theory side is you can just write down a mathematical model of you have an AI model that has some basket of superintelligent heuristics. And then you can reason out, well, if I look at these scale-up oversight protocols, do they scale and work reliably in that model? Can I write down, say, a proof in a toy setting that scale-up oversight would work? And the answer is currently, you absolutely cannot do that. Like none of the methods people are applying kind of like definitely work at scale.
And scalable oversight here means you can reliably reward the model.
When the model is kind of supervising itself as it is getting stronger. So the general thing the labs are all doing is this is part of their plan. And we know from the last set of, 5-8 years of research, like there are a variety of obstacles which block that in theory and have shown up in empirics that are not kind of being covered, in part because they don't show up yet at the current scale. So for example, if you want to have models kind of engage in kind of back and forth reasoning, this kind of slightly adversarial, right now the models can't get beyond a couple of turns of this. So if you imagine a human debate, say, you can get to like, humans can debate for hours and have like dozens and dozens or hundreds of back and forth points that you don't see in model behavior. And so we just know that we're not seeing the super intelligent case in the current empirics, but you can just write down on some paper or a whiteboard like what that should look like in theory and then try to explore it.
Why can't they get beyond a few terms of debate?
It's just not good enough.
Okay,
they just decay in accuracy. So they try to reason back and forth, and it just gets a few steps and then falls apart. And that's just not a thing a super intelligent model will be doing. So we know like with high certainty that we're not in the right regime yet, and we could be close enough. Maybe you get some knowledge of how the future will go from this experiment, but not enough of it to make me happy.
Okay, I'm still not sure that I fully understand if we're getting to the point where we're close to deploying superintelligence and resolutions research has gone really well. What kinds of things do you think you'll be able to?
Algorithm
present?
Changes.
Yeah.
So I think the hope would be in theory or low scale empirics, we can say, look, here's an obstacle to one of these protocols working, to scalable oversight, to personas, to different parts of the lab's training story. With this obstacle, this algorithm works and this algorithm doesn't work. And we can demonstrate that in theory, like here's a proof of like failure and success in different cases. Here's an empirical model which shows kind of, again, failure and success in different cases. You should do this kind of algorithm and try to scale it up, try to replicate it on your stack. We wouldn't expect that we would have perfectly tuned it yet. Maybe there's kind of many other aspects of their stack that are invisible to us, but we can give them guidance on which direction they should go in this like broader space of algorithms. I think an important thing to say is like in all of these approaches in sort of scalable oversight and personas, there's just a huge space of possible algorithms to choose from. And they're doing their version of kind of trying to filter the space. We will do our version as well. And hopefully those things can combine. The other case is that you say, well, we have an obstacle that we have.
Give me an example of like such an obstacle, but either in personas or in scalable
an obstacle
oversight.
Is like, so here's a couple of examples to obstacles in scalable oversight. So one is obfuscated arguments, which is basically you could have models that are super intelligent, but they're not infinitely strong. They're not magic, and so if you expect them to walk you through why something is true or false, they will only be able to do part of the story. And if they're better at giving you the positive evidence for, say, some claim being true, and really bad at giving you the counter evidence, but the counter evidence is actually the evidence that truly wins, then you can get wrong answers out of any scalable oversight method. Basically, because the model has tried to it's been kind of incentivized to win this game. It's like convincing you of something, but it's sort of found a space where it can give you the positive evidence, and again, it's not smart enough to give you the counter evidence, and therefore it kind of wins by default.
So just to recapitulate, so the hope here is you want to know whether a model has produced an output that you would actually endorse, and you're hoping to rely on the model's ability to explain that output to you because you've trained it perhaps in like an adversarial debate game against another model where honesty is the winning strategy. But it seems at least possible that the model might be just better at like propping up one side of the argument than the other, even if it's not true. Is that have I summarized that?
It's not even true in theory. So this was discovered via actual human experiments.
Okay.
So, I hired Beth Barnes into OpenAI, and she did some experiments where she took a bunch of human kind of debaters, so like humans arguing back and forth about whether these kind of interesting physics problems were true or false, like what the answer was to some physics problem, and then there was a human judge that had not seen the physics problem context, so they didn't know the answer. And one of the winning strategies was basically a debater would produce a very complicated argument that sort of sounded true, was false, but neither of the debaters, not the liar or the honest debater, knew where the flaw was. So just like a sufficiently kind of mushy, complicated argument with many parts that neither one of them could locate the flaw, and so it just looked like a plausible argument with no counter argument. And so one of the debaters might have said, this is kind of mush. I think there's a flaw here, but I don't know what it is. And the liar can just say, come on, if like my opponent knew if there's a flaw, they should be able to point it out. Like where is the flaw? But it just is the case that with a non-infinitely strong model, there may be a flaw that you can't find. You can't find the flaw. And that like showed up in human experiments. And the history actually was that Beth ran these experiments. She found other flaws. She fixed those other flaws. There was an iteration of like quick cycling on kind of finding and fixing flaws. And then they found this flaw and they like stuck on that one. And this was sort of found first in empirics. It's easy to write down a theoretical model of this. No. We don't have a good solution to this problem.
Interesting. And so and that's a problem because it means you can't rely on superintelligences debating each other.
Yeah.
And you can't hope that the true side will have an asymmetric advantage over the wrong one.
Unless you have some different protocol which sort of manages the dodges. And this is not just true for debate. Any scalable oversight problem has this problem. So amplification, kind of constitutional AI, kind of all of the if you imagine pushing any of these approaches up to superintelligence, past again where humans can reliably supervise, you will potentially hit this problem. Not with certainty, but like I think it's a pretty good shot at hitting it. And then we don't know how it will go at that point.
And something I actually am not sure I still fully understand is, what is the core basis of the belief that there might be some kind of phase shift when you move from human capability levels to superhuman capability levels, where our ability to supervise them just totally breaks down? So one example is we can train superhuman Go models or chess models. That doesn't cause some kind of like catastrophic problem for us.
It does actually.
Oh, it does. Okay, tell me. Yeah.
So if you take a fixed strength opponent, and you train a Go model to beat that opponent, it will quickly learn to be a bad Go player. Because it will just reward hack its way through the weak opponent, and then if you put it against a strong opponent, it will lose horribly because it's like learned bad habits. This happens to humans too. So if I used to be about 1 dan Go amateur. If I play sufficiently weak opponents too much with high handicap, I get worse at Go because I learn. I have to like fight off the tendency to play moves that are good only against weak opponents, and so we have a variety of empirical results where basically if you have a certain strength of reward function and you optimize against it for long enough, you will sort of get close enough that you see the difference between that reward function and the true performance, and then you'll get good at the proxy and bad at the real thing.
Okay, yeah, that actually makes sense. I guess I still struggle to visualize how that kind of failure would be super catastrophic. Maybe you don't need to tell a specific story about how it would be.
I think there is this question of like, how does like good behavior generalize? And so if it's the case that as you cross this path, as you cross this kind of this fuzzy boundary of kind of human level skill, the model remains in some sense a good entity, and is still trying to kind of like funnel data and training signal because it's kind of defining its own training signal the right way. That could go well. You could be sort of a nice attracting basin, which kind of pulls you closer and closer to good behavior, and you extrapolate to a good kind of superintelligent system. Or it could be that you're just not that close, or your algorithm doesn't have the right equilibria, and so you either are just going in the wrong direction. The model's like starting to reward hack. It reward hacks more and more, and it kind of gets off into some horrible track. Or you have an algorithm which there was no way it could have had a good equilibrium. It's just like at limit, it behaves badly in almost all cases, and you're just inevitably going to die if you train that algorithm hard enough. I think either one of those stories could hold. I think the hopeful story is that we could at least arrange to be in this world which is more path dependent, where if you're close enough to a good attracting state, a good kind of like basin of attraction, you stay there. And there's also some other evil basin of attraction which you really don't want to avoid, and you manage to dodge that one.
That makes sense. You've said before that your modal expectation is that we get full-blown superintelligence within something like 2 to 3 years. Could you walk me through what that looks like?
Yeah, so I think the main uncertainty here is, are the models going to be good not just at kind of verifiable tasks with kind of clean rewards, but also fuzzier things, kind of intuition, kind of like fuzzy planning, this kind of thing. And I think people are overweighting the probability that they're only good at the verifiable part. And if that is wrong, then I think we have seen so much progress over the last while that while the softer things lag, I don't think they lag by years, say they lag by like a smaller amount of time. And that I think can carry us kind of quite far in the next few years. And we've seen just such rapid progress in the last couple of years that could continue to go very quickly and keep speeding up. I think it could be slower, and I'm hoping it's slower. That would be that would be very nice. But that's sort of the worry.
What do you think is the likeliest way it gets good at these fuzzy tasks? Will it look like sudden generalization, or it gets good at learning? What's the story?
So I think it is the non-magical thing of the companies getting better and better data that kind of expands the spectrum of tasks they are good at. And so there's two things to say. One is that I think throughout the reasoning era, so from like '01 on, I believe, though I don't know for certain because I'm not at labs in that period, that they are not just doing verifiable work tasks. They're training against model self-critique. So you show the result of a task to a model and you ask it to judge. And that can work kind of across for more fuzzy things, but eventually it breaks down. And then the models are already good at verifiable tasks, and there's sort of like some weak penumbra of slightly less verifiable tasks they're good at. Those are also useful by people in the deployed world, so out to the labs. That gives you this kind of flywheel of data to play on and sort of experiments to learn from. And so over time, the lab's ability to generate data that is like spans out further and further away from verifiable keeps getting better. So they're sort of climbing this ladder of verifiable to non-verifiable just via the non-magical process of collecting just enormous amounts of experience and training data. And I think that because they're all kind of widely deployed, if that continues, you can push up into lots and lots of tasks very quickly. So I think you don't need massive amounts of sort of fancy generalization. I think you just need a lot of work, object level, on that kind of data generation.
Do you think, are they buying this data en masse? Are they somehow getting it from their deployment rollouts? Like won't zero data retention, but won't zero data retention
So
stop
I think
or?
you can get a tremendous amount from anecdotes plus buying data. So it's like buying data, but maybe you know what data to buy because you've seen glimmers of how people are using the models in practice. So I think the zero data retention thing doesn't block them from learning from deployments in all cases. And I've trained models in the past, and it is very valuable to know, oh, I have missed a kind of data, some sub-distribution of the space of tasks. And then from there you can learn how to fill that just by either generating data with purely synthetic, or you buy them from some data provider, from humans or the like.
What do you think is like the role of governments in this world? Resolution's doing its work. At what point might they need to step in? What might they need to do?
So I think there's a couple of different levels of kind of government action you could imagine. Any government can do a bunch of unilateral defensive work. So like you can work on defenses for bio or cyber or even persuasion potentially. So there's that defensive work can be done by any government kind of unilaterally, and it's kind of good to do. Then there's kind of last minute temporary pauses where it's like, oh, we're really close to training this really dangerous model. Let's chill out for at least a few months and kind of shift resources towards kind of from capabilities to safety, try to slow down a little bit, try to like just dial up all the knobs that we can to kind of in the direction of safety on the margin. That also means you could, for example, use algorithms which are a significant but not kind of like a fatal capability, like cost hit, like something that's like 2 to 10x slower. Maybe you can run that in this kind of temporary pause world. And then the more extreme thing is you have a broader treaty where you try to do a longer coordinated slowdown or pause across kind of multiple countries. I think governments should be trying to do all of these things, and then we'll see how far up the scale we can go. I think a critical thing there is that I do think we may be in worlds where the algorithms that work are, as I mentioned, like slower and more expensive, the algorithms that don't work, or you need to dial up.
Don't work for alignment, that is. For alignment. Yeah.
And you need to dial up either the amount of data or like do an algorithm pivot or something. And that, if you're in pure mad race between the various labs, that's hard to do.
Yeah.
And even a little bit of government kind of coordination pressure could make the difference in those worlds.
When do you think would be the right time to slow down? Like,
Yeah.
would you say right now? Now. Yeah.
So I think like my take is that if we were to carefully analyze this question of like exactly when we should slow down, it would be like a while ago in the past, because like we're just too close to this crazy future. So I think the trying to kind of be super precise about like exactly when in the future, like no, like already is the answer. I think whether we can achieve that is less clear, because there's political will and the Overton window and so on. But like that would be my kind of stock answer, is like now to in the past.
And should you think any one actor should unilaterally slow down? Like
I think that's hard. It is the case though that like there may be only, you could probably find a list of less than 10 people in the world where if you could get them to agree to slow down, you could do it. So it's not some extremely like enormous, like impersonal sea of people you have to get to coordinate. It's like lab CEOs, potentially people in China, leaders of a couple of countries. You don't get to that many people. And so I I think that the question is like if a lab did a unilateral slowdown, how much closer to that less than 10 people did you get? And potentially a lot closer because you've kind of made a stand. That said, like none of the lab CEOs want to hear that argument. They don't. They only want to do the non-unilateral things. And there's some argument in that direction, but it's also a very kind of convenient argument.
What do you think we should actually be slowing down? Is it the R&D itself? Is it like inputs to R&D, like chip production?
I think that,
is it deployments? What are we actually slowing down?
So mostly I don't have like a super cast answer to the optimal here. There's a general thing where we will not, I think, have the ability to kind of like stop progress. So if you try to slow down or you try to like have a pause or the like, you will be slowing progress, but then progress will be continuing. And I am, as mentioned, worried enough that we're close to this kind of ASI future that we get there in not too long, even with a slowdown. Exactly kind of what the ingredients should be to intervene on. I think, as you say, probably the answer is all of them would be good, but I don't think I have a Cooper cast good answer.
Yeah, I mean, I guess one thing I don't quite understand is how do you slow down in a way that affects the different actors in any kind of way equivalently? So especially if we're Chinese labs are also asking them to slow down, it seems difficult to be sure that they're slowing down in the same way that Anthropic or OpenAI are slowing down.
I think a certain degree of imperfection is required here.
Yeah.
So you have to be comfortable with measures that are not going to exactly be fair across all the labs. And so presumably this is what you need is a combination of technical measures, so like technical supervision and monitoring, but also like if you wanted to do like the grand international treaty, then you need kind of human audits as well and kind of and inspections and so on. But it will not have an exactly matched impact on every actor. And I think we just have to be okay with that as like slightly disparate results.
And do we also just have to be okay with any kind of like economic implication? It seems like so much of the global economy is like it's leveraged on there being continued AI progress. Like, is that just a hit you're willing to take?
I think my take is that if you were to stop all new model training, there would be this enormous ongoing wave of economic growth due to the current models. That I think if you just take that, it's enormous in terms of like positive benefit in terms of getting valuable use out of models. You have to learn how to work with the current models. But I think we're in a massive product overhang. We have worked only a little bit on how to kind of cater to the strengths and weaknesses of models. The models of June 2026 are just incredibly good at software engineering in huge numbers of ways, even kind of before the most recent models in the last like couple months. And so I would be fairly unconcerned with like that world. It is a trade-off. Like I think that if you get stronger models, they can do more things better and probably cheaper. So I think there's a trade-off there. But I think I would much prefer having time to nail down more of the safety story for both alignment and other risks than just massively rolling the dice.
What is it that gives you so much confidence we have a high product overhang? So if it's not already showing up in growth statistics, what are the metrics where you're like, oh no, but like look at this thing, like, you know, it is already very, very, very useful. It will lead to lots of economic growth.
I think there's so much use of coding assistance in particular. And I think that extends already to huge amounts of other kinds of cognitive labor, like any kind of like analytic analysis of like business or the things people can already do with models are so impressive that it is extremely unlikely to me that is seen kind of full adoption across the economy.
Yeah.
Like anecdotally, both from like myself playing with models and then just like reading a lot about what people are doing, there is a massive learning curve to how to best deploy these models into any particular area of activity. So like I learn better how to use them across time. So does everyone else. If we just were to stop for like even like 10 years,
we'll still reap the rest of that learning curve.
Still keep climbing. Again, I would be totally lying if I said there wasn't a trade-off here. Like stronger models are in fact better at doing lots of things, but I would prefer that trade-off.
Let's go back to government work. So you worked in government before yourself. I'm curious, what affordances did you find that you had at UK-ASI that you didn't have at OpenAI or DeepMind for changing the world?
Yeah, I guess there's a couple of them. So one is maybe I'll list three of them, and then we can go from there. So one is just adjacency to national security. So like being close to national security, because there's a bunch of ingredients out of the risk story that come from those sources, and you need collaborations with NatSec to have good takes. The next one is just adjacency to policy. So if we want to do this kind of coordination across the world where governments play a role, you sort of have to be in a government to be close to policy in that sense. That's not the only actor. Like we want a lot of third parties and nonprofits and independent researchers doing this kind of policy development, but you need part of the story just being in a government. There's a kind of a sub part of that, which is that there are, in many cases, sometimes governments only listen to governments. And so at ASI, we had a bunch of our own research, but often also we would just be able to go to another government and say, here's some of our research and some of someone else's research, like from Meteor or Apollo or the like. And that package was much more received and listened to than if it had just been Meteor and Apollo trying to go directly to a government of like various other countries. And so I think that proximity to kind of NatSec and policy and just other governments of the world, I think, is kind of the key thing.
It's very valuable. And if there's so many worlds where governments will need to play a role in things playing out well, like what do you think about all the AI researchers who are very, very concerned about safety, but who are currently working at AI labs rather than in the government? Like, do you think are they basically wrong to be doing so? Do you think they could have more? Yeah.
I think on the margin, they are in fact wrong, and many of them should leave and join governments. I think the amazing argument is just one of diminishing returns. There are a lot of people at labs. If you are a kind of a safety researcher at a lab, probably you're further out on the diminishing return curve than you would be if you joined a government or a nonprofit. And so if every one of the people at labs left all en masse and joined the government, that probably would be bad. But that's not the actual calculation. It's like
the marginal move is very high value.
It's pretty clear. And I think people look at themselves and think, I'm an individual researcher. I'm kind of a special snowflake. I have like a very particular agenda. I'm the only one pursuing that particular agenda. I should keep doing it if it's an important agenda. And I think that is sort of making a calculation which is a bit too focused. And if you sort of blur your self-image a bit and just think of it as like, oh, well, I am a safety researcher. I probably have broad takes and knowledge about a variety of things. I can advise governments on a broad range of issues. Probably the lab would pick up the slack on what I'm doing to some degree. It would work pretty well. Again, I think on the margin, the calculation is, I think, pretty simple.
And what do you think UKAC specifically will be doing from now until sort of the eve of superintelligence? If they play their hand very well, what kinds of things do you think they'll be doing that will be moving the needle one way or another?
Yeah, I think misuse risks are important. And so like the pure kind of dangerous capability evaluations are important. And that I think that story being kind of high capability and as in high research capability, and that also close to NatSec, I think is important for getting those kind of well understood. And then ASI does a bunch of work on mitigations, again, against both misuse, against loss of control. We have kind of a very, very strong safeguards team. Sorry, we as in ASI before I left. I think ASI already has strengthened the mitigations of the labs by virtue of being an independent kind of voice and source of research, and that will keep going. And then again, the big thing is, the main reason I joined the ASI initially is policy. Like, again, governments have a huge role in policy. ASI is the largest source of kind of government research, AI research capacity around safety that it currently exists. And so causing that policy advice to be maximally grounded in kind of the technical reality of things, I think just makes it much more likely to go well.
Do you think ASI is an asset to the UK specifically? Like, should every country just have an ASI of its own? How many ASIs do we need?
I don't have a confident take there. I think they're probably more on the margin is good. I think there's some degree of not wanting to reinvent the wheel too much. And that when there are other ASIs, I think piece of advice I often give is it's important to do a mixture of sort of their own research to build up technical capacity, but then probably don't try to be like a full-on evaluator across all the risks in the same way that AC is kind of closer to being. And then be in a position that where we can work together across multiple governments. And then two policymakers present, here's all the evidence from all the ACs plus all the nonprofits kind of appropriately integrated together. And that I think is like, to the extent you can get that kind of collaborative story right, it's much more efficient.
Because much more efficient. Okay.
Yeah, you get much more knowledge faster across all the governments.
That makes sense. And why did you leave AC?
It was in fact for family reasons. So it's better for my partner to be back in the U.S. And so I'm and it was, I think, fundamentally like when I moved here, kind of here in the Bay Area, here is in London, are the kind of the two places I can do my work. And so like now I'm kind of doing the reverse trip.
There was always a bit of a compromise. That makes sense. Yeah. And what's the day-to-day of your work? Did it, like, I feel from the outside, people are always worried that joining government is going to be a bit more bureaucratic than they expect. Like, how did you enjoy the job? Did it compare to working at DeepMind?
Yeah,
working
I think
at
it was,
OpenAI?
when I joined, I think it was like less bureaucratic on the margin than DeepMind. In part, that was because it was a fairly small team. And of course, when organizations get bigger, they get more bureaucratic. This is true generically. So it got a bit more bureaucratic over time just because of size, but not too much. I think, and then there's like constant work within AC of like improving that and kind of streamlining processes. And I think it ends up in a pretty good place. So I always enjoyed kind of that level of it. It was fine. And then I just got to advise a ton of research happening across a bunch of teams, a bunch of kind of policymakers and other governments and so on. And that I love kind of getting to touch a lot of little areas of things. So that was kind of just a very rich experience. And I think generally AC has a much easier time hiring very talented, strong junior people than senior researchers. And so I think that if you are a senior researcher interested in joining the government, I think that's a big unlock because like they're very good people to work with. It's very fun, but they do sometimes can benefit from more experienced advice.
How will resolution try and get us higher confidence in the alignment of a future superintelligence?
So we have a portfolio strategy across different research bets because we don't know what will work. And I would claim neither do the labs. So those areas, I think the main kind of initial set are learning theory, scalable oversight, complexity theory, personas, and agent foundations, and philosophy. And we'll sort of add to this if we choose kind of across time. You should pitch us if you have new ones. And then the hope is that both we can get those areas kind of fully resourced in terms of critical mass kind of size teams of humans kind of across all these areas, but also a lot of investment in automation, kind of tokens and GPUs and so on, so that we get kind of a full shot in each of these. And we don't expect to need them all to win to succeed. Like the hope is that we have a few successes, either in terms of generation of negative evidence of obstacles to alignment working, or positive evidence, which means here are two algorithms, this one works, this one doesn't work in some toy setting, such that we can kind of drive changes in labs or in kind of coordination broadly. There's sort of a core kind of three-part bet here, which is that in particular for theory, the labs just aren't doing any theory at all, hardly at all. Yeah. So like just doing theory at scale will be doing a highly differentiated bet at a resolution to what the labs are doing. And then we will bet kind of, again, quite hard on automation. So I'm kind of at AC in the alignment team there, we were doing kind of a bet on field building. This is sort of pivoting more to the machines, still having a bunch of people and researchers, but I'm trying to kind of fully resource in terms of tokens. And then there's a combination story where theory is more automatable than empirics, at least potentially for the following reason, which is just that you have proofs. You can construct some theoretical model and try to prove it correct, and that is a purely verifiable reward. And so even though I believe that eventually the models will be pretty good at non-verifiable things, they're better at verifiable things, and we can exploit that to make theory go faster than it otherwise would.
What's your model of why the labs aren't doing any theory at all? I guess some people are pessimistic that theory applies to a problem as like poorly specified as like alignment. Like what are the things that we're like confidently shooting for here?
I think they have there's just sort of a learned experience of empirics working very well, which we've sort of seen from capabilities and even now to some degree kind of mundane safety. And the question fundamentally is like, will that extrapolate past human level or not? And I think very possibly it does not. And that the kind of empirics, if you don't try to do this kind of like really try hard to scale down to model superintelligence, you can just miss effects. But they have the whole many decades of machine learning, all of the recent experience of labs is telling them that empirics works. And so it's hard for them to step out of that bucket because they have all of the dopamine hit saying like, look how good this is all the time. And they might be right and they might be wrong. And we should take kind of both of those bets.
I'm interested in the version of this world where we do successfully align the superintelligences and we get them, we've deployed them, and we have high confidence, thanks to Resolution and everyone else's research, that they will behave the way we want them to. What kind of technologies would you expect that they will develop next?
Yeah. All of the practical ones.
Yes.
And practical means like allowed by the laws of physics.
Yeah.
So I think we sort of solve aging. We get nanotech, again, for good or ill. Nanotech could be defense dominant, offense dominant. Right now, software has bugs. Software in the future wouldn't have bugs, broadly. It would just be sort of
bug-free,
perfect in most cases. I think we will have the ability to colonize the universe in various ways, probably via uploads. We probably will be able to upload humans into machines. My take is that people have this, I think, bad view that the machines will kind of be taking off ahead of us, and then even in the good futures, we'll be stuck behind forever, which I think is wrong. I think you can imagine uploading someone and then modifying them cognitively while preserving kind of identity in some meaningful way to be also super intelligent. So there's like that future ahead of us, should we choose it. Hopefully we have the option to also just live normal lives as humans on request.
What happens to the humans that decide not to upload? Like,
I think they are essentially irrelevant to the economy. But I think that we will have, I hope that in this world we will figure out how to like derive meaning from family and exploration and so on, whatever kind of the level of kind of cognitive ability is.
Do you personally expect to upload, by the way? Like, do you think this is
eventually.
Yeah. No. How would you go about making that decision? Like
I don't think I'd be the first one.
Yeah.
But I expect that we'll just have a good understanding of the science involved. We will have we've done a bunch of experiments. It will just work very well. The result is that people will they will feel great. They'll be then smarter because you can again, modify them in place in various ways. We'll understand the brain and AI and so on much better, so that understanding how to do that modification in a way that is kind of faithful is doable. And so that seems like a good deal.
What kind of results do you think you're looking at that is telling you this uploaded version of Geoffrey is faithful to the real me? Like, I'm confident it is like...
I think just some better understanding of how maybe kind of personality and intelligence and access to heuristics kind of interact. So if you imagine that it's just a version of you exactly, except that so right now you have this kind of layer of fake consciousness. Or fake serial thought sitting on top of your pile of heuristics. And then occasionally you have your conscious mind, it thinks that it says, oh, I want the answer to this question. And your brain kind of substitutes in the answer to that question. And it sort of come from this amorphous sort of sea of heuristics kind of seething underneath without your conscious awareness. If that just worked much better, then it would be kind of a fun way to be. And would it change your kind of intrinsic personality? It's sort of not clear. And so if you understand that separation, how that kind of layer of this veneer of kind of serial experience relates to this kind of the seething mass of heuristics better, then I think you could maybe separate out what is a meaningful version of ramped intelligence me look like.
No. And so your strong take is right now my serial thoughts are fake in the sense that they're not actually the computations by which I figure things out.
So as an example, I've been walking along on a hike and I duck under a branch and then And then my brain is like, you saw a branch, and then you duck under the branch, and that's what you remember it looks like. And it's like, no, that's not what it looks like.
Yeah.
It's like a bunch of reflexes that triggered in various orders, and like different parts of my body acted without entirely consulting other parts, and so on. And then your brain kind of stitches together some fake narrative into all of this. And I think that is just sort of intrinsic to how we experience the world. A lot of it is like it's not that inaccurate, but like some degree of your conscious train of thought is a hallucination as you go along the world. Yeah. And I'm very happy with this. Like I don't mind living this way. I sort of think of myself to some extent as like a bit of a shell surrounded, like it's like this thin veneer of kind of like experiential linear shell surrounding a basket of heuristics. And I enjoy.
You're fine with that. The shell life, yeah. If you do an upload, would your expectation be that there'll be two consciousnesses? There'll be the digital one, and then the physical one will sort of
probably will
hanging
get
out?
rid of the physical one or something. You like.
Yeah. Would you want to get rid of it? Like, would you want to clone the consciousness? Like, do you have a strong take on this kind of thing?
It'd be a very bad world if everyone is just like massively duplicating themselves into some horrible runaway exponential process. So I think the world of the future, if we get to the world with uploads, will have to be much more thoughtful about this kind of duplication.
So we'll have to have some kind of restrictions on duplication?
Yeah, restrictions, or just you've arranged the outer economic incentives so that the like reasonable behavior is incentivized in a good way. I don't have cached takes on exactly what the structure is there, but getting it right seems pretty important. It is not obvious that the economics and physics are consistent with the optimal way to achieve goals being having more individual identity, but I think it is plausible, either because there's speed of light delays, so that if you have like a bunch of intelligences kind of scattered around the world at like a radius of even like a light second, you can't be having them like constantly synchronized. So like some value in having local sort of quote unquote conscious experience, like local kind of higher level planning seems valuable.
Well, this integrated in one person? Is that what
yeah,
you're
or one person or something, but like
Yeah.
you just can't, if you have like a light second spanning consciousness, then you're a bit delayed.
Yeah.
It's valuable to have locality. Or we just choose that we kind of value individuality and diversity in this way, which I hope we do. And then the cost to that is like such a small factor, because again, you're sort of a thin veneer on top of like this pile of heuristics that it will be fine.
Do you expect this stuff to just go crazy fast at some point? Yeah,
fortunately.
but like, yeah, but like, why? Because it's just kind of not super intuitive.
I don't think there's obstacles to this. I mean, like crazy fast, there's a question of like, what does that mean? Potentially, you get the nanotech and the uploading within like a couple of years. Maybe it takes like a decade or two, but it feels kind of unlikely to take a decade. And like even if it takes like 2 decades, that's still less than a human generation. And so that's still on the scale of us adapting to the world crazy fast in some sense. And so I think we have to be ready for that in either of these like speed cases. And then, why do I think it's so fast? I guess like, one, I think simulations are going to be really good. So we've seen, I think with something like AlphaFold, that you can build proxies for kind of quite complicated physical systems that you can just sort of play with purely in silico. And I think that will be broader and broader across a number of areas. Although this is uncertain. This is not a guaranteed thing. But assuming you get that kind of behavior, then you can iterate a lot of your experimentation just in simulation.
But even AlphaFold has quite a lot of failures of generalization, right? From what I understand, like a lot of the time it'll predict a certain certain way that protein folds, but then you actually try that out in an organism and it just like it does completely fall apart.
I think this is true, but it does well a lot of the time.
Yeah.
It has some degree of understanding of its own errors. And then it's also like, I guess there's 2 reasons to believe that AlphaFold is not anywhere near the ceiling of that performance. So one is that it's like just the first couple systems. But 2, it's not actually trained from you could imagine training these models from physics in a deeper way. AlphaFold is trained from a history of other kind of proteins.
Yeah.
If you manage to solve kind of simulation proxies across a greater diversity of timescales, like all the way down to like quantum chromodynamics and kind of everywhere in between, that I think you can potentially fill in the gaps and do kind of error correction of AlphaFold-like models, like even without going to data some of the time. Maybe you need some data, but just less.
No.
And so I think there's a potential ceiling of performance of such models, which is like quite enormous.
And like, are you relying on ordinary market forces to get us the pragmatic technologies in the right kind of order, to get us the right kind of upload? Like, what's the...
When you say the right kind of uploader, like I think that the answer would be no.
No.
So I think one mistake that some economists and kind of analysts are making now is they're sort of like, there's an assumption that humans are the source of demand. And so whatever the machines will be doing, well, humans are the demand, so we're plugged into the economy in some meaningful sense. In the future, where we get ASI, machines can perfectly well act as the demand of the economy. So if you have pure market forces and these superintelligent models are not trying to improve the world on our behalf to some degree, I don't think there's an economic need for uploading. The machines could perfectly well just do their own thing. So I think you have to have enough alignment that you are sort of jumping into a world which is kind of like suitably democratic and clean. And I think again, the pure economics would say that humans are not very relevant in this world because we're not kind of economically relevant.
And why is that happening? Even if we've aligned the machines, like why do they have consumption demands of their own? I don't know if I quite follow this.
Then it's not pure market forces.
Okay, yeah.
I think it's like then it's the models wanting to design the world so that humans have a meaningful role and a meaningful access to resources and so on. Once you have access to resources, then conditional on that, then like market forces can take you a lot of the rest of the way. But generally, I think markets should be modeled as optimization engines. So they have like we live in a world which is a mixture of free markets and then regulation to kind of channel that optimization power of markets, and we will have to be in that world, I think, indefinitely.
That makes sense. Yeah. What gives you so much confidence that solving aging, uploading, things like this is actually in principle possible? Like, why are there not some kind of diminishing returns to intelligence? Why do you think we can make such like radical progress? Do you have intuitions here that you use?
So there are diminishing returns to intelligence. They just occur like way out past ASI, I would claim. So I don't know why that's relevant to this question of aging. Like basically for aging, I think
maybe it's an unsolvable problem or something.
Oh, I see what you're saying. As in, why don't the diminishing returns strike before you solve aging?
Yeah.
I just don't think aging sounds that complicated. We've only had a couple hundred years of understanding kind of, I forget, the germ theory of disease is just not that old.
Yeah.
There have been various proposals for aging that are relatively understanding light in that they intervene on the consequences of aging and kind of the degradation of tissues and such without having to understand the entire body and all the dynamics, even if you could do that with ASI. So I think aging seems relatively simple.
Isn't it kind of bottlenecked by serial time though? Like, how many experiments will we be able to do where we observe the aging of like an organism? Like, isn't that something, especially for humans, we live pretty long lives.
So I think if your time constant was a human generation, then 100%, but it isn't. Like you can intervene on someone and you can see how they're doing in terms of various measurements and then kind of like gradually learn that way. There are other organisms that we're already understanding, like in the last couple tens of years, a better understanding of aging in kind of smaller organisms. Like some of this has turned into like sort of wellness improving treatments for humans. It just seems like none of this is that hard. Again, if you're like a super intelligent AI or like humans assisted by such, it seems quite doable.
Do you have intuitions about what kinds of fields of science will be the most and least amenable to heuristics?
Yeah, I guess I don't have a great. I kind of think all of them is like the default take.
Yeah.
This is how humans think. We think via a combination of heuristics. Like I think one kind of challenge for alignment and understanding AI in general is that people have, say, a take that, it's extremely important that we have models write out their reasoning in chain of thought so we can supervise it. But this is like just hilariously not how humans think either. Like when you ask me the answer to a question, what will happen is part of the time I just come up with the answer like completely in some like not written out form. And then I just start talking and the details kind of flow out as if I've reasoned through it. But I totally haven't. That's like a complete
That's not
lie.
how you've solved the
Like,
problem.
I solved it by just guessing the answer via crazy heuristics. And so similarly for a model, if you ask it to solve a problem, sure, sometime it'll reason it out, but other times it'll just guess the answer. And then you say like, why is that true? And he'll write out some convincing rationalization. And there's rationalization there is a pejorative word, but it's also just intrinsically how intelligence works, even for humans. And so we have to understand how to make models work, be safe, be aligned, while not believing we can get away from this like notion of heuristic reasoning.
One thing I don't fully understand is you seem to believe that generalization might not be that powerful. We'll get the superintelligence because they'll be able to get data on these fuzzy tasks, just by deploying them, slowly and slowly the labs will be able to get the data. The models will get good at the things that they get data for. Why is that not more of a break than like 2 to 3 years? To me, that seems like there's so much data that they for this kind of like very long horizon, very fuzzy plans that we're imagining these superintelligences will want to do, like running a company or like running an election campaign or something. Like I think I basically have the same picture of you as you there, but I imagine that's going to be okay. That means it's 10 years until they get good at all of these things, rather than like 2 to 3 years.
So it could be 10 years. I guess the reason why it could go faster is that one of the skills the models will be getting good at very rapidly is data generation, and from like data generation, environment design, kind of data and data augmentation. So if you look at kind of you look around the world, there's a lot of data on kind of all tasks, but it's in the wrong format. It's like not an RL environment. It's someone's static attempt at writing out a trajectory. And so the question is, if models get really, really good at AI R&D, even in a mundane sense, at running experiments, at like building data generation, building environments, like this kind of iteration, will they be able to increasingly well take the bad data that exists, like static trace data or like examples, and like sort of squish it a bit and rearrange it into some environments that you can iterate on. And then you do have some generalization. So it's not the case that the planning skills required for doing AI R&D or theorem proving or coding are like totally different from the planning skills you need to do for like taxes or merger, M&A or being a CEO or the like. So like some degree of generalization plus like getting better and better using data plus just like the fact that they are a bunch of like right now CEOs are in fact trying to use these models to like survey their companies and like learn this thing. So like I think the case for slowness could apply to some of the tasks, but then across the next 2 to 3 years, say, you get this like enormous wave of like companies deploying things internally for AI R&D purposes and like speeding up their own like within the labs, but also out to customers who are still deploying the models. And like that feels like a very unstable world where you have like incredibly strong models at including not just like the verifiable reward parts of this, but also like the things that take more human judgment, because you have a bunch of experience of this kind of iterated like day to day or week to week. And the question is like, as you get better and better at those tasks, are you also better at kind of closing some of the holes in your sourcing of data for other things and like the ability to do kind of fast, like just fast adaptation of models and data and so on. I think the other thing is that because we've seen all this development of scaffolding over the last year in particular, that gives you a faster cadence way to inject skills. So if you're really good at planning, at kind of and thinking kind of general, and you're getting better and better at scaffolding, do these come together to give you kind of a bigger part of the story? I hope this is wrong. I hope that like, in fact, the 10, 20-year story is correct, but it just feels like the world where maybe the claim is that the space of tasks for doing the full suite of R&D, AI R&D and software engineering skills is already much broader than people I think give it credit for. Now, maybe I would say this because I'm like a researcher and like
That's
software
what you use
engineer,
the models for, yeah.
But I do think that, I mean, I don't know. I'm also like, I also know a bunch of other things about the world, and I'm like, and I don't think that somehow like the intuitions that I take away from software engineering and I don't know like martial arts and so on are just not as distinct like magisterial as people imagine them to be, and so I expect like because if there was no data about kind of all these other tasks, then I think you'd be stuck. But I think there'll be like if you have hundreds of billions of dollars to spend on that data, then I think there's a path.
If there were a trend to extrapolate for like the ability of the models to generate data for these tasks for which kind of, some kind of crappy data in the wrong kind of format exists, like what would that trend look like? Do you know what it would be, what the metric would be?
Oh, I'm not sure. I think so one thing I'm a bit sad that there seems to be like insufficient data on how good the models are, these non-verifiable tasks. There's like my guess is that some of these show up in like Epic's like ICI index, which is I is probably index, so that's redundant. But there's enough of a vibe people have that in fact verifiable words are taking off and non-verifiable words are stagnating, that I wish I had those curves. Like somehow that should be a curve that I can see easily by going to some website. I don't know what that website is currently.
Yeah.
So then the more detailed question of how would you track models' ability to generate data, that feels like it's just maybe a subcategory of AI R&D. But I don't know of a good proxy for that currently. Yeah.
One of your other research bets is on personas and character training. What are the core facts about the way personas work that we don't currently understand that we would love to understand before we get to superintelligence?
So first, I guess what is personas are low-dimensional structure in models. And what that means is I have, say, myself as a person, I have a bunch of correlated traits. So like when I say I have correlated traits, I mean if you look at one of my personality traits, it will be correlated with some other trait. Like an example of this is in the political view sphere, if you evaluate people, if you survey someone on some issue, you can predict with pretty decent confidence their views on a bunch of other issues, even though those kind of rationally should be different, but they're totally not different. And so across pre-training, the model will have picked up all of these correlations from human data. Like it sees a human world that has all these correlations between good behavior and bad behavior in one thing, many other areas that are more neutral, kind of, but again, that span this kind of correlated behavior. And so what that means is the model knows a bunch of structure in the world, which is kind of about human correlated behaviors. And then we have all these glimmerings of empirical results where that correlation kind of shows up in weird, sometimes bad, sometimes good ways. So like the first big paper here was emergent misalignment, which is by various people, including Owain Evans. If you train a model on code with vulnerabilities without comments saying it's vulnerable, it will learn to do a bunch of horrible things, including like celebrate and admire various dictators. And that is because there's some coupling between model being nice about the code it generates and model being horrible about kind of which people it values. And then there have been similar work at kind of Anthropic on sort of like if you train on reward hackable environments, the model turns somewhat evil in various other ways. AC did a similar thing with open weight models. OpenAI had a recent paper where if you train on a bunch of good behavior, then you get...
It generalizes as well, yeah.
It generalizes in good ways. If you train on a bunch of good behavior, it generalizes in good ways. So there's all this kind of this glimmering of structure, and this kind of... One thing that indicates is if you were to understand the structure very well and manage to preserve it during training in the right way, that may allow you to extrapolate up to superintelligence with some preserved notion of the structure. There are a couple of caveats to the story. So one caveat is that, well, if you're applying a ton of optimization pressure, you're going to be mucking with the structure all these different ways. So we know from other papers that if you, for example, like there was a paper by David Africa at AC where if you train models to be consistent, you can accidentally break their chain of thought legibility. So you train on one kind of modal behavior and you like make them secretive in some bad way. But if you were to kind of train very lightly, this is a separate paper now, you sort of only try to match statistics between various modes of behavior, then you kind of fix this kind of bad effect.
So you train lightly for consistency, and you don't get secretiveness.
You don't get the bad secret behavior. So there may be some ways of like training lightly on structure so that you preserve it as it kind of goes along. The other caveat is that clearly, if you had low-dimensional structure at pre-training and up at superintelligence, they must be different because one of those is human level, one of them is superintelligent, and those are different modes of behavior. And so somehow there's going to be some mapping process from the behavior and structure picked up early in training up to superintelligence, and you have to follow that mapping along. And so the general bet at Sequent is this is a bunch of potentially good news that is very, very poorly understood, and there's not a lot of kind of even like toy models of this in theory that would tell you how that mapping emerges, is preserved, kind of changes through training. And so the hope is we can understand this better, and then that will separate algorithms to kind of break or preserve the right structures.
That does sound like the kind of experiments that might be easier to do in a lab, though. Like presumably, some of these questions are just about the scale of the post-training that you're doing and what that might do to the personas acquired in pre-training.
Yeah. So
or are you still optimistic?
I think I'm optimistic for a couple of reasons. So one is that like some of the papers I cited are just on open source models at low scale. I think this is a particularly fruitful area for this mixture of kind of empirics and theory, because I think that like modeling low-dimensional structure is just like a lovely thing to write down, kind of theoretical model-wise. And so I think if the labs had like enormous theory teams trying to explore what the mathematics of that picture, that would be great, but they do not. So
but they should get them in your view. Yeah.
But they're just not. They like. I think we've went from an area where like the labs were kind of a bit dismissive of theory to now they say they want to do it. And they're still not doing it for various cultural reasons and historical reasons. Maybe they'll do it in the future, but for now, we actually have to make some progress.
That makes sense. Yeah. I'm curious about how you think about the field of alignment. Like, strikes me that bunch of other fields have these sort of core concepts that help organize our thinking. Something like Nash equilibria or atoms. Like, do you have a sense? What are the equivalent concepts in alignment?
I think we have concepts. So, like, I think like certainly. There's just sort of reward hacking and kind of like models existing in different kind of scales of complexity. But all of these have holes in ways that, like holes and gaps in ways that we don't have them in these other more established fields. And I think a hopeful thing is that the field of alignment has been around for sort of maybe not more than like 20, 25 years at the most. And then there was very little work. There's a lot of different areas of theory and kind of approaches one could explore, and then most of the history has done very little of like only a couple of approaches. Some of which we'll hopefully do at resolution, some of which will be more novel. And so I think there is a potential for low-hanging fruit in even just finding the right definitions for those core concepts that are more resilient in kind of theoretical model land, and then we'll better predict empirics going forwards. Just because people haven't tried very hard yet.
People haven't tried that hard, even though 25 years, I guess, is not that long.
And then like the whole field of personas empirically is just a couple of years old, like 1 to 2 years old, and so no one has tried to write down kind of like solid theory for this like over like 10 years. If we only have 2 to 3 years, hopefully we have 10 years. But if we have little time, then I think it could still be sufficiently low-hanging fruit that the combination of humans and then a bunch of automation can get us some answers.
Do you personally feel like your understanding of the field has changed very much from when you were first working at OpenAI?
I think it has. So I think I was, for example, I was thinking less about path dependence back then. This whole idea of kind of low-dimensional structure, I was not kind of like factoring in as much as I have in the last couple of years. Even like obfuscated arguments. This is like this problem we can discuss in debate or scalable generally that I didn't fully understand until a couple of years ago. So I think a lot of it has changed, and like I think maybe had the field not been advancing kind of very like faster and faster overall, I'd be more optimistic that we would have a shot at solving the problem, or like making a big dent in the problem. But again, like because I think we have these glimmers of hope. It's just then very little time.
So the main source of pessimism is a lack of time, and the main source of optimism is these glimmers of hope.
I think
these examples of like positive generalization, basically.
The specific thing is sort of low-dimensional structure. And like I think that both can give you negative but also positive generalization in some ways.
Yeah. Will we be able to specify the superintelligence's utility function if all the alignment research works well? No, that's never going to happen. So what?
Well, I don't even never is too strong.
Never,
a word, and for the next until it's too late, we would never be able to do that kind of precision. So I think the only hope is if we learn or we luck out that we don't need to hit that precise a target, and I think it's possible that in fact we do have to hit a precise target, in which case we're not gonna make it. If the structure of models, helping supervise models, helping generate training data for models is sufficiently error correcting and has some give, then there's a hope.
So we need to hope that there is this kind of basin, and we get a high enough confidence that our training procedures are landing us in that basin, and that's the best thing we can hope. We're going to hope for. Basically,
I think that's basically right. I mean, I think there's a question of can you model out the situation to the point where you have a model that exhibits this phenomena, there being mini basins. You can then calibrate that model against empirics in various ways and see like how does this look like in practice. Like one idea of a mathematical object one could try to construct with empirics is. Imagine there's like the super intelligent limit models, and there's a variety of basins. Some are good, some are bad. Can you write down a coarsened model of like and actually train a small model that trains along? You can kind of modify its branch points when it could go one way or the other, and you sort of draw a map through training space up to these basins, such that you have like literally a branching curve that like starts out as a single curve, and then it branches again. It kind of maybe some of the branches converge back in together, and you could literally have 1,000 checkpoints of the model showing this map of training through time, such that you then have an object which you can play around and iterate and try different algorithms, just like projected into the space of this kind of map of training.
And what would you observe about how the branching works that would give you confidence that this will happen at superintelligence too?
I think it would be you would have some mathematical model of this branching, and then it wouldn't give you like full confidence, but you could be able to see, oh, if I do this kind of algorithm, or maybe I can like here's a test I can do to pinpoint or like to narrow down when am I likely to branch, such that I can apply more resources there or like spend more effort. I think there is a bunch of hope that we could get to more understanding, even on a short time scale. But like, I don't know, hope is not like a lot of probability. Just like we should try.
Do you think will alignment be the only scientific field that's very difficult to automate? Or are there other ones?
I think the general problem with alignment is that you don't necessarily get more than one shot. So like to the extent that we have some evidence from current models, which is important. So you don't get exactly one shot, but like the behavior of models up at ASI, up at superintelligence, that may just be different, and we have to understand that kind of in advance, if so. Most other fields, you can try to structure things so that you get iteration. There are risks that are less like that, coming from AI and other catastrophic risks, but a lot of fields have this kind of iterative potential, and then you're in a much better place. Are
you surprised at how much iteration we get at like the current level, where it's superhuman on some kind of tasks, but not broadly superhuman in some kind of sense? Like it feels like this to me is potentially like a positive surprise.
I think there's some update there, but again, I update there much less than the lab folk do, I think, on average, just because I think we haven't necessarily seen kind of shifts. And I think we do have additionally negative evidence Because there are cases when the current behavior is a model of the future, or at least does show negative. They've tried very hard to not have a bunch of reward hacking, and they still have a bunch of reward hacking in production deployed models. And so I think that's clearly a case where we don't understand things well enough to have iterated enough to pound away the errors, which is bad news.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. You've got this great blog post from, I think, like several years back, where you make an analogy between LBJ's presidency and aligning superintelligence. And your point, as I understand it correctly, is LBJ, he's this guy, he's motivated almost exclusively by power and wanting to acquire more power. He also has all sorts of asymmetric advantages against his opponents, where he's like better at being a politician than them. And yet the American political system still aligns him towards like great positive outcomes, like, you know, civil rights and the Great Society. And I'm stretching the analogy here, but what do you think, what claims do you think it is about the American political system that can give you faith that LBJ will produce positive outcomes that you want? Like, what does the LBJ pre-deployment safety case look like?
Yeah, so the first thing to say is like, it's actually, so one is I'm not going to take a stand on whether he was net good, because he also did a whole bunch of horrible things. I think the take is less that I'm confident that the system in fact aligned him to do good. I think he did probably want to do some good. He just thought, I must gather all this power along the way to do good, as many people think. The case is more, this is a very poorly designed game. A nice analogy, which is fun, which I will cite from that post, is like, he became Senate Majority Leader because he realized that position had all this power that everyone else was leaving on the table. And so, for example, he could choose as Majority Leader in the Senate when to call the vote. And so he would just sit in the chamber watching people randomly go in and out of the chamber, I don't know, to the bathroom to get like a snack or something. At some point, the balance of votes in the chamber was in favor by a few votes, and he would call the vote and win because he had a perfect memory of like who was going to vote for him, and there's like extremely good predictions there. But like that is just like a very badly designed game that was played with like, there was this one LBJ guy who's incredibly good at the details, and there's not like the competing LBJ force like trying to like be a counterbalance. And so I think when the American system works well, it is because there are effective balances and counterbalances. It's not clear that those are always working well, but it's also not clear that the American system is like the uniquely best like balance counterbalance system we could have. And we do have the potential to have a more well-designed game and training process, more custom for this process. And I think if you get this kind of this counterbalancing, then I think that you potentially can get through a lot of the problem. So an example is like, if you had the other LBJ, there was like, it was opposed to the first one that's saying like, by the way, everyone, you realize what he's doing here. He's like cheating the vote system. And everyone is like, that's ridiculous. That's clearly unfair. Let's fix the rule to break that. I think that intervention would get you so much power over this kind of the misaligned components of LBJ that I think it's within hope to imagine getting that story right.
So that's an example of a system that's like poorly designed, but actually reasonably easy to solve.
Yeah. There's a more egregious example of this from another one of Robert Caro's books, which is Robert Moses would write these bills for the New York state government to pass, which is contained like these trick clauses that gave Robert Moses all this power, and then no one noticed the clauses until after they'd all passed the bill, and it was so late that they would have had to lose a ton of face if they just rolled back the bill. And so if there had just been another Robert Moses opposed to the first one saying like, you know, this bill contains this like horrible power grab clause, that would have been like an unworkable strategy on Moses' part. And so there is this potential for monitoring that's like much more invasive against the AIs and various kinds of alignment schemes, and our ability to intervene kind of all throughout training in a way that you can't with a human. That's just there's many affordances we have on this process that in these examples of people that have gathered a bunch of power in sort of misaligned ways, it just feels a bit fixable if we get the situation right. Now, whether we'll get it right is like obviously not like it's a bit dicey.
Yeah.
But there's hope there.
How many of these latent exploits do you kind of think that human society probably has?
Just tons. Absolute tons.
Yeah. I'm curious, how quickly and by what means do you think the first superintelligence would be able to solve Pentago? So you solved it.
I mean, Pentago can be solved in like order like 10 to the like 17, 18 flops.
Yeah.
So like pretty fast.
But how is it doing? So imagine it's not in the training data. Like, is it literally just like chain of thoughting?
Well, no. If I was a superintelligence solving Pentago, I would just literally just like run. If I cared about it, I could just run the whole computation again.
Yeah.
Extremely cheaply using faster software that I was able to write.
Yeah.
There's a question of like, can it do it? So Pentago is a board game. One property of board games is they usually have some heuristic structure, which you can intuit. And then below that structure is a huge amount of just essentially random calculation. And the only way to see the calculation is like doing the calculation.
Yeah.
And so the question is, how well is Pentago modelable by heuristics? And I don't know.
You don't have an intuition for
I
this.
have tried to train, I don't know, medium, small scale neural networks to predict my kind of cached opening book of Pentago. And they don't do as well as I was expecting them to do, like a priori. So it's possible that a fair amount of the structure of Pentago is kind of randomish. It's also possible that as you scale up a ways, it kind of like phase shifts down to now it understands the heuristics and kind of nails the story. But I don't have a good cache sense.
That makes sense, yeah. Did your time working on simulations at Pixar give you any kind of greater confidence in the ability to use simulations to understand things like physics or biology?
I certainly. So I think that my PhD was in computational physics. There's I guess a couple of things. So one is the reason physics works as a theory, like the reason there is a field called physics, which can make a bunch of predictions, is like effective field theory or effective physics, which means that you don't need to understand the high energy, the very fine structure to write down a model of coarse things. So you can write down a theory of atoms, a theory of molecules, a theory of kind of steel beams and so on, without the theory of the thing below the theory you're currently modeling. And that robustly works across a wide variety of scales. And that is, I think, there's this generic hope that we've seen throughout physics and other areas of science that you don't need to model the substructure a lot of the time. It's also hope for like alignment because that kind of intuition also says that maybe there's fields of or theories of, say, speed plus heuristics, which don't need to understand the architecture that we're using or the details of the transformer or the like. They're sort of quite generic. If you make some appropriately kind of creative assumptions about roughly what that substructure might look like.
And that helps us if alignment is computationally reducible in this way?
No, it helps us write down theories of alignment.
Oh, I see. Okay, yeah. Because you don't need to understand the substructure. You can capture it with a high-level theory. I'm curious, when did it crystallize for you that this RL plus LLMs essentially would be the path to superintelligence? As far as I understand, you were arguing for this already way back in 2019?
Yeah, 2018.
2018, okay. Yeah, tell me, what did you see?
This is sad, but I don't think I saw, it was not that complicated. So in some sense, I arrived at OpenAI in 2017. It was already kind of Paul Christiano was already writing down schemes that were kind of, had this idea of using language and reasoning to like decompose things. And then like write alignment in terms of like these like language models. In fact, like the summer I arrived, Alec Radford and Paul had tried to run RLHF on language and hadn't worked at that point. So that was kind of in the general area. And then maybe the critical thing is like AlphaGo, because I think we had a sense that we couldn't do this kind of like you couldn't model things as kind of explicit reasoning too much because it'd be too slow. The models would do it a different way. And AlphaGo is like, no, just like actually doing the tree computations, like mixing explicit reasoning with heuristics does give you the strongest thing on the planet at playing Go. And that, I think, one, it like gave us some emotional license to write down alignment algorithms based on this, but also just like it felt like that path of like you do a bunch of reasoning, you can write it out, you can like compress it, you can kind of iterate in these kind of environments. It's like environments that are about reasoning, and then you would get the ingredients for that from language models, which OpenAI was exploring, and so was say Google Brain as well, and a bit of DeepMind. That could just take you all the way there. I think part of this is I have a general take that like a lot of this kind of reasoning stuff is not magic. So we just have a big bag of heuristics, including heuristics about how to reason, kinds of planning to do, ways to error correct. And so some of the intuition here is that somewhere in this like sea of internet text, there are a bunch of ways of reasoning that are good. There are a bunch of ways of reasoning that are bad. If you take that initial ingredient and then kind of strengthen and like pick out the good parts of it and strengthen them with RL, you get all the way there. So that was so 2018, I sort of told Dario, this is like annoying, that I would write a document called Language is Enough to get to AGI. And then I didn't write it until 2019. So like early 2019 is when I actually wrote a document.
Is when the document was created.
But that was like the way I was like, that I think not just me, but also like other people there were thinking.
What's your model of why reinforcement learning from verifiable reward took so long to materialize? Like why did O1 come out in 2023? Why not before then? Or 2024 rather?
I don't know. I think some of it is tuning. Some of it is that if you have this model of you have to get to sufficiently good error correction to be able to reason for a long time without decaying, then as the pre-trained base model improves, you get closer and closer to when you can you get to lift off on the ability to do RL over like a long reasoning trace. But I don't know. So in some sense, I would have expected it to happen a bit earlier, and I was wrong.
And what's your model of what RL exactly is doing to the pre-trained model? It's selecting for parts of the pre-training distribution which already contain like useful reasoning traces. Is it teaching it generalizable strategies for reasoning? Like which of these matter?
So I think a lot of part of it is that a lot of a lot of human reasoning strategies as written in language just are generalizable because we've learned patterns that apply quite to a lot of different domains. And so the first thing that it does is just like down select modes of behavior to remove the bad, the unworkable kinds of reasoning, or to
some of which I've created online or something.
But the other thing is like people often write down the final answer and not the chain of reasoning that got them there. And if you try to have a model predict the final answer, it's just going to be forced to hallucinate unless it can do all the reasoning that a human did kind of off stage in its like latent pass. And so somehow there was a combination of like tuning of our algorithms plus like sufficiently strong base models to, in around O1, those started to work well.
If you had to make a bet about what alignment technique is ultimately going to end up working, do you have a spidey sense? Do you have a front runner right now?
Some combination of personas and understanding of learning dynamics and scalable oversight. And then, so like, I think I mentioned sort of agent foundations and philosophy, and in some sense these play into how to think about pieces of that story. So like a lot of the agent foundations work is thinking about kind of ways of modeling the limit, ways of thinking about like path dependency, like models reasoning about themselves in a way that you have to sort of untangle some recursive loop. So like that understanding could also kind of teach us how to do the other components of like scale-up oversight or personas or the like, or like would replace them in some way or something. There's a bit of, I think an important principle for the org is that I come to this with my kind of inside view like sense of like how things could go. And right now maybe that's like scalable oversight plus personas plus learning theory or learning dynamics kind of coming together and sort of fitting each other's holes in some way. But we also as an org will have this outside view perspective of we're going to take a lot of different bets. Not everyone should have the same view about how the pieces will fit together. And the hope is, again, that we don't have to like get success in all of the areas to win. We just have to get like, we will try a bunch of things, and if we get kind of important insights and algorithms or obstacles from some, even just one area, that could be enough to kind of sort of account for the entire org.
And is there a future where timelines look so short that you just decide we need to focus all our resources on one single bet? Because we're like this approach of like trying to aim for lots of things doesn't make sense anymore.
So here are three reasons structurally. I have a cast answer here. So like why we wouldn't want to do that. So one is that there's strong diminishing returns usually in sort of like token or DPU spend. So if you'd have to be really, really confident in a particular area to not want to hedge your bets and give the other areas enough that they can continue to be like reasonably well automated. And hopefully you've just raised like in this world where you've established some strong progress in one of your areas, you can raise a ton of money, but you probably do want to spend a decent chunk of that on but just lower on other areas to take advantage of this diminishing return curve. The next one is that it's possible we get all the way to the end, or really near the end, where you've trained like a superintelligent model, and people are still bickering about timelines, even within the lab, but certainly kind of one step removed, kind of at nonprofits, because I've found it very fascinating how far we've gotten into this AI takeoff scenario that we're all are living inside, and we have these massive disagreements about whether things are slow or they're saturating or the like. And so somehow my model is like, we're still not going to know what the timelines are, like maybe a week before someone trains a superintelligent model externally. And then finally, if you have to make a trade, like there's like part of org design at resolution will be arranging things for psychological safety as we kind of go into this kind of crazy town world of like accelerating AI. And that means like, if we're working on automation, kind of prepare so that people are like no, they're not going to just get like snap fired with no warning, without like that kind of thing. Know that we wouldn't make this kind of horrible trade where they have to we kick them out of the org or whatever, and they have to like scramble to find the new thing if they still believe in there. So those are all just like bad plans. And so I think we'll want to design this org resolution, but also like a lot of other companies will face similar challenges of like designing the culture and the plans within like companies and research labs and so on to like prepare for lots of change. And one way to prepare for change is to say, we're not going to cut you out of like all of your resources at the last minute just because we think we've gotten to confidence.
Beyond not snap firing people, what are the other things that you can do to build a culture?
I think that one thing is one thing I've learned over time is that like it's very important to have even just like how you craft Slack channels so that people feel comfortable speaking. And so you could imagine it's very bad like before automation if like you have a Slack channel where say a bunch of junior researchers are discussing their details of research, and you have a bunch of like high up executives like just lurking and observing what's going on. This inevitably kind of like just like saps the conversation or pushes it into direct messages or something like that. There should be some intention required to kind of like put your thinking, your context into the machines. You should be doing that in a way that you kind of want to do it. You should have the option of having meetings, obviously, like that are not kind of like watched by the machines. So there's some like designing of like a non-dystopian org, which I think is it's table stakes. It should be easy to do, but like you have to do that intentionally. I think some companies have tried to go like
tracking,
a bit too far in this
yeah.
direction and like gotten a bunch of backlash and could have for understandable reasons. So like there is a desire, if you're trying to automate things, of having all of the context available to machines, but you shouldn't do that too much because it would be a bit dystopian.
Not totally indiscriminate. What kinds of talent are you most hoping to get into resolution?
So we are looking for a mixture of sort of very standard kind of ML engineering and research talent for automation, for some of the empirics, and then also hopefully a large, like a decent number of very, very strong mathematicians and computer scientists and physicists to kind of push forward these like various frontiers of theory research. I think part of the story, the claim or the kind of the founding bet here, and also to some extent when we were doing kind of the AC alignment project back at AC, is not much has been tried. So we haven't really treated as a world alignment as a problem worthy of taking the best researchers from various fields and kind of putting them on the problem. And now that has gotten easier because everyone is getting more worried. And still, I think not enough research has happened to be confident that there isn't low-hanging fruit. And so possibly the definitions are fairly shallow. If you get people who are very good, they can find the right way to model the situation without even that much fancy mathematics, but just like some understanding of how we approximate superintelligence on paper, and that might give us the answer to how to make this go well. I think there is this very important principle of like the shallower the mathematics, the more likelihood there is of fast progress. Like if we had to do just an enormous amount of incredibly deep theory building across like decades and decades of time, that would be very rough. If it's like no one has really found a good way of modeling this notion of kind of speed plus heuristics and reasoning about the complexity theory of that class of algorithms, that could be a thing that we make progress on in 6 months or a year. And then I hope that we can make a very fun environment where the kind of the human creativity part of the problem is, or eventually the machine creativity, is finding these definitions, figuring out how to model the situation, both alignment and capabilities of these models. And if you have below you a bunch of automation for expanding out like candidate conjectures and proving them correct, or finding counterexamples, or doing numerical experiments, and all of that, the models are very, very good at because it's the thing they're already good at, and they'll keep getting better. Then you can kind of play in definition space, play in modeling space.
Which is the most fun thing to do. What, like, maybe this doesn't make sense as a question, but what are the clear definitions that you'd be keen for us to get a better sense of? So one is speed, how to define this speed and heuristics model.
Yeah, I think speed and heuristics, and like so an example of a toy model I would like to see is right now the labs, they do some pre-training, they take a model, they ask the model to make some data, they train on the data, they iterate this weird process. They might have literally thousands of different modes of asking the model for data. Like it's a very, very complicated object, just like a modern training stack. But you can imagine distilling this down to some very simple model, which is like you just have, again, pre-training plus self-generation, and you iterate that. Maybe that already captures enough of the flavor of RL that you don't even need to add RL as a component to that model. And if you could build that toy mathematical model such that it represents emergent misalignment and subliminal learning and these other kind of phenomena that we've seen in the last few years, and then explore them more rigorously, both in theory and in doing maybe very, very scaled down empirics. That gives us a playground with which to explore in algorithm space.
And you would use this model to understand subliminal learning?
Well, so subliminal learning is when you have like a personality trait of a model, and it generates data for another model, and then that kind of the next model inherits the trait, even if the data generating is unrelated to the trait.
But there's a model which you've trained to like owls. You get that to output a bunch of numbers, and you train a different model on those bunch of numbers, and it somehow also inherits the fondness for
But
owls.
I think the somehow is actually not that mysterious to a first intuitive approximation. It's just because there's this low-dimensional structure, and that is like the liking for owls is correlated with all these random other things, including numbers, and then like that structure is flowing through this channel and then showing up in the resulting model.
And your intuition is we have a pretty good chance of understanding how that low-dimensional structure forms on a theoretical level.
Yes.
Yeah.
And then if we have that understanding, we can use it as a lens to rule in or out various algorithms as being like optimistic or pessimistic. Like, will they succeed in preserving or mapping that structure in the way that we want across? One of the traits of like a world-class theorist is just definitional creativity. And I think to some degree that can be, I think there's enough of a chance that can be ported across to this new area of alignment. like new to them, that we can make progress quickly.
Sounds like a good deal for them. They should.
I think so. Also, we can pay them well, so that'll be good as well. So I guess maybe the big thing to say is, again, we have some inside view reason why we like each of the individual areas we're kind of thinking about, like learning theory, scalable oversight, personas, agent foundations, philosophy, this kind of thing. We may have missed some. If you have a thing you want to do, if you like theory and you think, well, I buy the general story of gains to scale for org scale of having kind of shared automation and being able to share ideas between areas, and you think this is a good place to work, but it's not in your list that you've given in this podcast, still reach out, still pitch us. And I guess an important principle is that we will want to believe in you to some extent, but like not that much. Like everything here is a bank shot. We're just sort of trying to spread the probability around a bit more than the current labs are doing. And then also, we don't need every area to be the same size. So if there's like a few people working on a particular area, if we have like small critical mass, I think that can still be quite powerful. And we expect a lot of the basic understanding of both how to do automation for theory and also just basic things like reward hacking, how to model it, this kind of thing. Those may generalize across areas of theory in ways that are quite useful.
So you've picked a bunch of fields which you would love to hire from resolution. How did you pick those particular fields? Like, what is it about complexity theory or other fields that is why you think that's like going to be particularly helpful for your research agenda?
So there's kind of this inside view case for complexity theory that it's like modeling superintelligence and kind of weak and strong amounts of compute and how they relate. But then the outside view case is we do just need a more rigorous understanding of this kind of problem as a whole, this problem of alignment. And there's a bunch of areas that might be relevant for that. And we want to try to be a home for a bunch of those in a way that takes advantage of scale by sharing automation and sharing ideas, sharing how to model kind of the basic concepts of reward hacking and misalignment and so on. And the hope is that scale will give us kind of faster progress kind of throughout different areas. And then also, we don't think we are the only game in town. So we will try to publish things. We want to be a kind of friendly member of the community, kind of feeding back. It's possible that we have some ideas and then someone else takes those and actually solves the problem in some useful way. And so we'll try to get that balance right as well.
And if you do this research, you try and find solutions to these obstacles. But what happens if you don't find these solutions? You yell. What exactly does that yelling look
so
like?
I think I actually misstated this in the initial blog post, where it's like we might need to yell as if it was like an eventual thing we do. I think the rather thing is is try to build a culture and a comms practice and so on, where we're just putting out this mixture of obstacles and glimmers of success kind of throughout all the time. And so if we find a way of modeling the alignment problem that says it is hard, that is extremely valuable as a publication and should be celebrated as such. Both because it might tell you that you need to pause, it might tell you need to be more careful, or it might be the thing you need to then like filter down and like narrow in on the right solution kind of in the long term. And so I think building a culture of equally celebrating both positive and negative results, I think is kind of key to this whole exercise. And a hopeful thing there is like there are like somehow in complexity theory, in various areas of physics and mathematics, there is this like some of the highest profile results are obstacles. Like there's in complexity theory, there are actually 3 obstacles to P versus NP called relativization, algebraization, and natural proofs. And people just like those are buzzwords. People celebrate them. They're very famous. In physics, there's the firewall paradox, which is like an obstacle about how does quantum gravity work near black holes, which is again is like very celebrated. It has this cool name, the firewall paradox. So like the hope is that culture is not something we have to create afresh. It's like a thing that pervades these areas of theory already. And I think, again, bringing that in and finding those obstacles is both just a necessary part of the modeling process, and then also can either plays into hey, we should slow down even more because we have these horrible obstacles, or it tells you to ramp up data or something or care and time in some algorithm which kind of might work, might not work, or it says, here's the lens your new algorithm has to go through, and it lets you find it faster. So we published a paper, alignment, automated alignment is harder than you think. And the reason why I think this fuzzy evidence problem applies more to alignment is that I think there's more of a story for how to incrementally work on the problem of improving capabilities across time with capabilities than there is for alignment. So you just get to do hill climbing in some sense on capabilities. And labs mess up. They do sometimes produce models that lie more or more reward hacking. They have to go back and fix the training signal. They do this both internally within labs, but also literally some deployments have been kind of missteps in this that they had to fix. But they generally get to kind of climb this hill of gradually improving capabilities because we can measure them. I think because of this effect that everything could shift as you cross through human level intelligence. If you want to do a bunch of research with automated machines, with machine automation prior to human level, you don't necessarily learn that much about, or you learn some, but not as much as you would like about this future superintelligence. And so the worry is you just don't really see what's going on. You can your experiments that you've done for prosaic alignment on avoiding kind of current model reward hacking just don't tell you what you need to know about the superintelligence. And so you can automate them, but you haven't automated the kind of this conceptual modeling of when things will break down or not as you go through this kind of scale up.
But so the reason that is the iteration works for capabilities but not for alignment is because there's a phase shift between the phase shift between subhuman and superhuman applies in alignment, but it doesn't apply for capability. I don't know.
So I think it does, but the question is say we get to ASI in 5 years.
Yeah.
I think the skills you will have learned in the meantime on capabilities will they will be skills that got you to the next rung up.
Yeah.
And then as you go, so the question is when we get up to human level, what will happen? So up to human level, you can supervise the model, and so you can still be hill climbing. Even past human level, you can be sort of trading. It'll become harder, but you still get to say run the model for a small amount of time and then supervise it with more human attention, or supervision is a bit easier. And so in the areas where you can do this thing, you can still be climbing. And then the question is, what happens around this point? And I guess my intuition is that when you're doing a very difficult software engineering task, you will have to do a ton of planning and kind of subtlety and subtle reasoning to be able to say do a month's worth of human type work as a model over a period of a day or an hour or a week. I don't know how long it will take. And so the question is, if you hill climb your way up to a model that can do that level of reasoning, are you close enough to the danger point that you'll just kind of you'll get there because by proximity, or will you kind of stall out at that point? And I think the reason I think you won't stall out is that's already stronger than humans, and so I think I just expect it to continue, basically via momentum, kind of up past this level. I think also there's one thing to say is the way to get to kind of super intelligent alignment is, I think, at least some component of scale-up oversight, where the model is supervising the models. All of the labs are doing some version of this. They're just doing kind of the empirical hill climbing version. And there's a big space of possible scale-up oversight algorithms. I guess my claim is that some of these work for alignment, some of them don't work, but we will be able to be hill climbing our way to things that work kind of empirically. And so that will give us some ability to kind of push past human level kind of by a fair way, just from kind of this overhang of hill climbing on scalable oversight algorithms. And then the worry is that we've picked the wrong ones,
And we won't know.
We won't know.
Yeah.
And that will kind of shift. But I think it is like this is an area where some people have very different intuitions that in fact that this effect will call capabilities to stall. And I think it is like one of the arguments against the speed.
Yeah, and I mean, I guess it kind of relates to the Go example you said before, where if you try and train a super intelligent Go model, but it gets a very bad Go player, it will also learn bad strategies. And you initially said that like that's a reason why there is this kind of if you personally don't understand what's going on, you might not be able to train the model to do what you want it to do, even if you're doing I don't know, amounts of compute that would normally generate super intelligent play. But yeah, that it's occurred to me that would be an argument why capabilities would slow. And in that case, the capabilities are slowing.
Well, so notably,
we're also not aligning it to what we want. But
yeah, notably though, in their like literally what happened in AlphaGo is that they did a bunch of iteration. Sometimes they did mess up, and they trained a model against itself in a way that overfit to some weird model distribution. It got to like apparently superhuman elo. Playing against itself and past versions of itself. And then they tried it against the human, and then the human wiped the floor with the model. And then they tweaked something, and then that was fixed. And then again, the model wiped the floor with the human. And so the question is, as you're playing around in this space, trying to do model self-supervision, can you do that kind of iterative tinkering? And I guess I'm more optimistic that tinkering gets you capabilities, because if you mess up, you get a model which is weak, and then you're like, this model is shit. I can't use it to do things, and you kind of notice that over time. Maybe it takes you a little while to realize it because it's like domain superhuman, and then you fix it. So like the failure mode is towards weak models that then almost by definition you just notice that eventually and fix it. It might take some time. The failure mode for alignment is you make a mistake, you deploy the model, it takes over the world, and then you're done. And so I think if you had this model of the world where, in fact, say we imagine they were perfectly symmetric, and there was the same failure rate for a given deployment of an AI model to have failed to get this ad hoc kind of tuned scalable oversight right. The same error rate between capabilities and alignment, then up at superintelligence land, like say 20% of the time you fail and your model is bad. It's like you miss a generation. And then 20% of the time, also the model takes over the world. And one of those two things you can iterate, and the other one
you can't. Yeah, okay, that makes sense. Yeah.